Good afternoon to all of you, wherever you are watching this, the latest session in our Infra series. Swarajya and Construction World has come together to cover the various facets of Indian infrastructure. So we've had 3 sessions so far. Today we have the pleasure and privilege of having a very special guest, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal. Sanjeev is currently the Principal Economic Advisor with the Government of India. Sanjeev is a polymath with, eclectic interest. He's a best-selling historian. Of course, he's been a banker in his professional life, and after which he joined the government. And Sanjeev is also quite very well engaged on topics related to urban infrastructure. He's almost an urban theorist as well, actually. So, I mean, it's such a pleasure and privilege that he's consented to join with us today. A quick note on the structure of the session. So we'll have our host Pratap having a 20 to 25-minute conversation with Sanjeev on various aspects related to today's topic, which is building smart and sustainable urban infrastructure, followed by discussion with our distinguished guests. So without much ado, I hand over it to our host of the evening, Pratap of Construction World. Pratap, all yours now.
Thanks, Prasanna. Welcome, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Pratap Padode, founder, editor-in-chief of Construction World and Smart Cities Council India. Before I ask you to share your thoughts on the topic, let me introduce you to our panelists for today's discussion. We have Mr. Raj Cherubal, CEO, Chennai Smart City. We have Dr. Sandeep Mahatme, Director, Urban Development, Agartala. Dr. Ramnath Sonavne, Secretary, Maharashtra Water Resource Regulatory Authority. Mr. Dr. Rajendra Jagtap, CMD, Pune Mahanagar Parivahan Mahamandal Limited. Mr. S. Krupa Shankar, Head, Safe and Smart Segment, Smart World Communications from L&T. And Mr. Srikanth Vishwanathan, CEO, Janagra. So as you can see, we have a well-represented panel, and the discussions with you are going to lead on to several further discussions with them. Ideally, you are an urban theorist and have quite deep views on this subject, but I invite the conversation style with you. So we've seen 6-fold increase in investments in the urban sector from rupees 1.57 trillion to 11 trillion, which was 2004 to 14 with a 1.57 trillion, and now we have the 11 trillion 14 to 20. All this for city planning and city development, and obviously cities are the engines of growth. But somehow, and I would urge your historian to also speak on this matter, that where did we lose this plot? I mean, we were ahead of the game in terms of planning and everything, but somehow now urban planning, before the old smart cities movement has come about, was relegated to the absolute lowest priority. Your comments?
Well, let me say that I think the problem about losing the plot is actually a breakdown in relatively recent times, in last 50 or 60 years, in beginning to think in terms of rigid master plans as being the way to think about cities. And the result of that is the urban dysfunction you see around you. Before that, actually, we have a very long tradition of urban design, and but much of our philosophical dysfunction comes from a complete misunderstanding of that long history of urban design. So we have in our heads that we did this one set of great master planned cities called Mohenjo-daro and Harappa with straight roads and so on, and then we did nothing else till somebody built Chandigarh. And you get the impression that Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were proto-Chandigarhs, and in between we did nothing. And you continue to have this impression in your head that Chandigarh is some sort of an ideal in all of this. But in fact, that is totally not true. So for example, when you read Arthashastra, which by the way, for some strange reason is seen as a book full of spies and things like that. In fact, this business about spies is only a very short section. There's plenty in the Arthashastra, incidentally, about urban design. And there are many other treatises on urban design, building design, architecture, aesthetics, and so on, and many other books later on, Shilpa Shastras, etc. All the way to Jaipur, for example, which was built, by the way, on traditional principles, which were developed much later than the Harappan period. And all the way right to modern times. I mean, many of the princely states had very good cities, and some of them are still very nicely built and functioning cities like Vadodara and so on. But these were not built with these rigid Cartesian plans, which we have come to convert into some sort of a religious text in recent times. So let me take you back to the idea of the Harappan cities. By the way, the Harappan cities were not master planned cities. They were continuously evolving cities, and you can see how those plans evolved. So, for example, Dholavira used to have an upper town and a lower town. After a period of time, what happened is that the city expanded and expanded outside of the original design. So what happened is that an extension was created. And you can clearly see that the original extension was perhaps slums, where it was a little informal. And then at a later stage, the municipal authorities straightened things out and relayed it. And therefore, Dholavira ended up having three layers of towns. One upper town, which where the nobility lived, a middle town, which was the original lower town, and then another lower town. So then this original lower town became the middle town, and so on. And you can see the city change, it adapt, and of course then at some point around 2000 BC, it went into decline as climate change changed the circumstances. And even then, you can clearly see adaptation attempts being made through creating more and more water reservoirs, etc. And ultimately, it was still not tenable and it was abandoned. So, first of all, this whole idea that there were these great master planned cities in Harappa is wrong. Secondly, we have, oddly enough, come to think that post-Harappan cities, or the cities that were part of other parts of the country, were somehow not properly designed. This is again not true. You had actually, first of all, contemporaneous to the Harappan cities, civilizations in other parts of the country, not the least in the Gangetic Plains. And there's more and more evidence coming through that contemporaneous to the Harappans, there were a Gangetic civilization as well, which we call the Copper Horde civilization, and which was just as technologically advanced. And you've just done major digs 2 years ago in Sanauli, which is just east of Delhi, where they have found chariots and all these kinds of things, which suggests that there was a linked but somewhat distinct civilization in the Gangetic Plains. They are now, if we look hard enough, I'm sure we'll begin to find more and more of these other civilizations, even as far south, even in South India, which, by the way, fits our own traditional understanding of India, which was that it is not that civilization came from the northwest and the rest of India was sitting around waiting for the Harappans to come and give us civilization. So this idea itself is wrong. But anyway, since we are talking about the Gangetic Plains, the fact is we are now finding evidence of more and more urban settlements in the Gangetic Plains, which are very old. And it's quite possible that Varanasi was contemporaneous to the Harappan civilization. At the very least, it is a very old city, but certainly by the late Harappan city, period, which is the early Iron Age, you already had a fairly large settlement in Varanasi. And this settlement has survived till this day. So 4,000, Varanasi, even by conventional reckoning, is 4,000 years old. It perhaps is 6,000 years old. And it doesn't have any of the characteristics that we tend to talk about as being straight roads and all those other things that we are so excited about Harappan cities. But the mature Harappan period only lasted for 400 years. Whereas Varanasi has lasted 4,000 years and it's still a thriving city. So whatever Varanasi was doing is clearly a superior design. So what is Varanasi doing is surely the more interesting point than what Harappa was doing. After all, Harappa was abandoned. So what is Varanasi doing? The point about Varanasi is continuous adaptation. You see, it's the wiggly squiggly lanes of Varanasi are a problem if you bring in cars into the equation. For a pedestrianized world, that has no concern at all. You can turn and twist and turn as you wish. What is the problem? So in a pedestrianized environment, the design of Varanasi is perfectly fine. All the things we find irritating about Varanasi are not issues. Instead, it has got far more important things, which, by the way, in a post-modern city, we tend to think of being great things, which is it has got lots of public space, all the ghats. It has got mixed use, as opposed to the industrial era thinking that you must have separated uses. It is completely mixed use. You got temples right next to it, housing next to it is a market. It's completely mixed use. It has mixes all kinds of social groups, rich, poor, all kinds of people live next to each other, and so on and so forth. The point I'm making to you is, and by the way, it has lots of history, architecture, personality, all the things that 21st century cities invest in. And by the way, I have been very much a part of urban design in Singapore and the urban thinking in Singapore. People tend to give the impression in India that, the best planned city in India is Chandigarh and the best planned city in the world is Singapore. Therefore, if you get Chandigarh to get up in the morning and do yoga, then it will end up as Singapore. It's not the case. They're actually completely different models. The model of Singapore is continuous adaptation. How Singapore looks today is continuous adaptation for how it looked in 1965. Chandigarh, on the other hand, attempts deliberately to continue to look like how it looked like in 1965. So therefore, I would argue an adaptive system that is able to evolve with the times while maintaining continuity with its past. In other words, a complex adaptive system is a far more effective, efficient system in the medium term to urban design than having this master planned approach that Chandigarh attempted to do. Chandigarh, by the way, it is the most successful version of its type. Most of those cities that attempted that are cities like Dispur, Durgapur, Burnpur, and so on. Kollani, none of them have succeeded. So this model clearly does not work. And even Chandigarh is essentially an expensive piece of real estate and is, I would argue, essentially a subsidy scheme for serving and retired bureaucrats. It is not a city at all. Whatever, economic or cultural and other things that it brings to the table happen outside of the plan. Mohali is not a part of the plan. That's why it has a certain ability to evolve. Even Nek Chand's garden is technically illegal. It's on forest land. So the point of the matter I'm making is that rich urban plans fail. Point about Harappa is not that it succeeded, but that it failed. And the point about Varanasi is it's still going strong.
Right. I think economic rationale originally brought the cities to where they were located. And over time, as people found that a reason to be around, whether it was a river, whether it was a school, whether it was a institution, temple or whatever, you're right. So I think we cannot challenge that rationale for setting up the city by just making plans of a city on grid lines of paper. Totally agree with that. But coming to today's times, and thank you for that journey. Excellent piece of history there, which a lot of things even I didn't know. In current times, what about the prioritizations? I'm seeing that a lot of money in the low-hanging fruits, or let's say the projects which are into transport, obviously housing and energy. These are, of course, very important. But somehow and like Mahatma Gandhi ji said long back, that somehow we neglect waste. Sanitation, good sanitation and waste somehow gets again relegated to lower priorities. What is your view on this?
Well, actually, even the fact that we are investing in metro systems and so on is relatively new. Till, I would argue, as recently as the year 2000, we used to have this mental idea that, somehow real India lives in its villages, which, by the way, an idea which propagated by Mahatma Gandhi himself. And so, therefore, there was some sort of a guilt about investing heavily in urban infrastructure. And this mindset is a real problem. And by the way, it's completely ahistorical, because if you read Indian history, you will see India has gone through many cycles of urbanization and de-urbanization. And consequently, there is no evidence to suggest that India lives in its villages. India has sometimes lived in its villages, sometimes it's lived in its cities, depending on that point in history that you want to look at. So Harappan period urban, post-Harappan period rural, then again urban during the urban age, and so on and so forth. And the last big round of deurbanization happened as recently as the 19th century, when the British essentially destroyed our industrial base. And then they rebuilt their cities, then came back. So we are currently going through today another phase of rapid urbanization. So that phase of urbanization that we are going through, my own sense is that we will be in the next 10 years an urban majority country. So how can you say that India lives in its villages? So therefore, I am entirely in favor of heavily investing in urban infrastructure. That doesn't mean you don't invest in rural infrastructure, but you need to invest in urban infrastructure. In that context, one of the things in which we need to invest is not in heavily master planning or some predestination of our cities. Instead, the real game is in managing our cities. Different idea. In India, what we do, we invest heavily in this plan, and then if it goes wrong, we say, oh, we didn't implement the plan properly. Now, that's a complete waste of time. What we really need to do is to invest in the managing of cities along the way. So, as I keep telling people, the problem is that we don't manage Gurgaon well. To say that we should have planned Gurgaon better is a waste of time. Because there is no way on earth in 1990, when Gurgaon originally got going, that we would have been able to predict that this city, which basically had one factory, Maruti, and the rest of the place was essentially meant to be a retirement place for Delhi's middle class. That's how DLF sold its plots. There's no way we would have predicted that that's where all the BPO sector was going to land up, and then everybody, all kinds of things were going to land up. So managing that adaptation is 90% of the game. So what we need to do is to invest into things that are needed along the way for managing it. And in that context, we need to invest in waste management, because we need to have transport management. We also need waste management. The problem is that is not what we are spending our time doing. We are wasting our time in saying, oh, in the master plan, this place is supposed to be so and so. So what if it's supposed to be that originally? You change it. But we don't allow that changing happen, because we have these ideas that somehow making some change is going to be a bad thing. That we are not being true to the original vision. Who cares about the original vision? So this is, again, a mindset problem. Managing along the way is the important thing. By the way, you can clearly see the parallels between this and many other of the reforms you've seen recently, or even the way, for example, we managed the COVID crisis. We didn't waste our time trying to know exactly which exact way the epidemic was going to emerge. We did an initial lockdown to just buy ourselves time. And since then, we have done a step-by-step Bayesian updating and adaptation along the way. So this idea of dealing with an uncertain future is a common thing that you will see in policy making that I advocate in various fields, whether it is in dealing with COVID or with liberalizing rigid regulations that get in the way of innovation in, for example, cartography. You may have just seen the liberalized cartography. There used to be this completely ridiculous Survey of India monopoly over cartography in India, which we have finally, thankfully, ended. We used to have ridiculous telecom regulations on our BPO sector. I have no idea why we've ended them. So these are all cobwebs in our mind, which we have introduced ourselves. We need to get rid of them. We need to have a much more dynamic approach to things. And those dynamic approaches look messy on a map. But on the ground, they work much better. And proof of that is the following. On the ground, when you are flying over Delhi, on the ground, Delhi looks like a messy place. But when you're taking a flight over Delhi, look at it. It looks very orderly from above. You see, all the sector roads are correctly laid out, the buildings are nicely laid out. Why? Because you see, the view that the planners were taking was the top-down, that kind of view. So consequently, the thing that you were trying to do, we actually did a very good thing of implementing. Our problem was that we implemented the wrong thing. The real game is managing on the ground, not the top-down thing view. So therefore, the game is consequently about managing the things. And the things we are now finding out as we build our cities is, one of the major things we need to manage is waste management, which you mentioned. It has to be managed. But by the way, we need to also manage it in the rural areas. I happen to be a trekking enthusiast, and I just came after a weekend of trekking in the Aravallis in northern Rajasthan over the weekend. And beautiful place, but even in some remote place you'll go, there are heaps of plastic trash even in our small villages. We need to do something about this.
Right. Managing cities, I think, is definitely important, but here we have another problem. Municipal commissioners have an average tenure of around 10 months, making it impossible for them to have any commitment in any project that they take up. So, I mean, if you don't have a city CEO, now this, unless we reform this municipal act so that we can have city CEOs, how is this ownership of this change that needs to be brought in, how is that going to come forth?
I totally agree with you. You need to be able to keep people there for long periods of time. Municipal government needs to be taken very seriously. In fact, in many ways, this is where administration hits the ground. I'm not just saying municipal, it can also be district level, rural, whatever. Point is, the cutting edge of our administration, of any administration, is in the daily lives of things, about getting the garbage moving, getting the water pipe getting to you. Unfortunately, the way our administration is set up, this is where we pay the least attention. So, I mean, for example, the municipal commissioners in India, by the way, tend to be the junior most person in the civil service with the least amount of experience. So a 32-year-old person will be put in charge of a city which he has never visited before, and he'll be given 10 months to restructure it. Now, it is actually simply impossible for that person to do. The people who are now working as joint secretaries should actually be the people running the cities. And they should be there for at least 3 years, if not more. And similarly, the elected system also needs to be somehow correlated to the administration. We have a system of councillors which are completely dislinked. If anything, the only the value they are adding is getting in the way of the municipal commissioner. So you have a bizarre system where you neither have mayors who are in charge or a DC who is in charge. Somebody has to be in charge unless the buck stops somewhere. So we have the worst of all worlds where nobody is in charge of the city. It may well be a better idea to give, if you want an elected official to run the place, let an official run it, then have a mayoral system. You know, having so many, having a parliament at every level, after a while it breaks down the thing. I mean, parliamentary system is not scalable down to everything. After all, any of you who have attended any RWA meetings anywhere in India will know that the politics of the RWA is far more fierce and vicious than of the parliament. So you've got to be a little careful about trying to overdo this thing by having parliamentary system at every level. Maybe a clearly directly elected mayor, in which case there'll be one person in charge for 5 years. That is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is that you continue to retain a weak councillor system, but then you make the municipal commissioner, the official, the powerful guy. But in that case, you have to have a more senior official who must at least be 35 years old, if not more. And this is when you need that person to be there for at least 3, 4, 5 years. And that would be an important thing. And then you upgrade the role of the municipal commissioner in the hierarchy of the bureaucracy. So the mayor of Kolkata or the DC of Kolkata is a powerful guy. He should be, aspiring to be, the DC of Kolkata rather than be the transport secretary of West Bengal.
So, Mr. Sanyal, this is what is connecting a unique thing that is happening now in our country for the first time, that 9 cities have raised municipal bonds and they are moving towards some sort of a model of sustainability if they are able to do this. But unless and until we fix this part about the accountability and ownership of the CEO, this issue is always going to sooner or later have problems. And what we would have created something good in terms of sustainability would get affected. So I think that is one thing that we need to really take care of. And I hope there are some moves happening to take care of this change that we need to bring about.
Look, much of this is not rocket science. Most of the world does it routinely. So basically, you need somebody being in charge of the system.
Yeah.
And it consequently, being the mayor of a town has to be an aspirational activity. Today, somebody wants to be an MLA, but not a mayor. Now, nowhere else in the world this is true, by the way. People prefer being the mayor of a major city. Like, for example, the mayor of New York is better known than the governor of New York. Right? The mayor of London, after the prime minister of the UK, he's probably the best known politician of the UK. And so on and so forth. In India, nobody even knows who the mayor of a major city is. So you either have this mayoral system. Now, I understand that this may in our political system cause problems because the chief ministers of the state may see the mayor as being a rival. And so this immediately causes a tussle. Now, I'm not an idealist, as you can tell. So I don't care how things look on a master plan. Question is what works. My own sense is that in our political architecture, the DC may be the easier point so that the political overlordship, so to speak, overview happens at the chief minister's level. Except maybe for a very large city like Mumbai, maybe you can have a elected mayor, but in the most part, it is possibly makes sense to have the chief minister being the person in charge. Then you have to if that is the model you're going down, then in which case you have to make the chief minister's representatives, who are the DCs, have to be very powerful characters. And so that goes back to this point about who is in charge. My own view is that you can skin the cat in different ways. And I wouldn't be too bothered because it's a point about somebody being accountable. And that person, having been made accountable, has to hang around in that system long enough to understand what that system is. So, at a relatively junior level, they should serve maybe as a deputy DC or running a small bit of a municipal thing. Then later on in career, become a DC or chief of the municipal commissioner or chief municipal commissioner, whatever the relative role is in the career progression of a civil servant. Even there are state civil services which can also have this as an aspirational role, whatever. I mean, those are things maybe the individual states can do. Don't even have to have the same model in every state. I mean, Sikkim can have one model where the chief minister personally runs Gangtok, but that is not going to work in Uttar Pradesh where there are so many cities. So there are different models. It doesn't matter. But the key here is that somebody in charge has to be in charge, and that you have to be clear who that person is, and that person has to be a senior enough person and has to be given some time to work. Then all of these other things will work, because after all, if I'm buying a municipal bond, why am I buying this municipal bond? Who is in charge, accountable? By the way, municipal bonds will only function if actually you allow for default. What happens in the case of a default? So all of those things are all require that somebody has to be in charge of this thing for a period of time.
So Sanyal, I'd like to take advantage of your independent outlook, unique outlook, and have the last question now to come to you. That how do you see the smart cities mission? I mean, it has achieved a lot of success in certain areas, and certain areas it's been wanting. How do you see it now progressing? Like you believe in the evolution of things, we have now sufficient experience to know, body of experience to know how the things have panned out when we have run it in a certain way. How do you see this actually now emerging?
So I think the interesting thing about smart cities, the idea was the following, is to, first of all, decentralize the things that each city wanted to do. That was the basic idea. It had, by the way, many people confuse smart cities with smartphones. It had nothing to do with digital digitalization. I mean, it could be. Some cities opted for digital outcomes, but it need not have been. Even cleaning up a park and painting a heritage building or whatever could very much be a part of a smart city project. The idea in a smart city project was that it was a decentralized idea where the cities themselves came up with certain ideas and they were given monies to do whatever they did. This was a very different idea from the earlier top-down approach which was run through projects like JNURM. And that is really the innovation. It had nothing to do with digital. The innovation was bottom-up versus top-down. Now, JNURM, a lot of money was spent and some things went right. It's not just that they went wrong, but it did have the problem that you ended up, for example, JNURM coming up with, for example, promoting bendy buses for Shillong. Now, Shillong is a hill city. How can you take bendy buses anywhere? So those kinds of things were happening. A lot of resources were wasted because they were not, there was no local ownership of those ideas. The smart city idea was basically to provide some local ownership. Some of those projects have worked, some have not. My own view is that that should be okay. Not every project will work. The idea here is, I would argue, first of all, it is important at this juncture where we are now to document this, both the successes and the failures. Because institutional knowledge is very important. Otherwise, one of the big problems of India is we keep repeating the same stupid mistakes over and over again, and we don't progress. So I think this is a good time to take the project, see if it worked, see it didn't work, put all of this documented information on public domain. It will do two things. One is that it will create accountability to those who took the resources and did whatever they did. Two, we will learn that even in those cases where they fail, that certain kinds of ideas don't work. Please don't do this again.
Correct. So I think the outcome report is necessary to be tabled, and that would probably establish rules for the future for Smart Cities Mission, I think, as I can understand from what you say. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanyal. Thank you for giving that enlightening address and the conversations with you, and I'd like to take them ahead in the future too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we move on to the panelists now. I think I want to first go to Mr. Raj Cherubal. Like I think earlier we were discussing that he is the last man standing. And I think you have done projects, a lot of projects have been completed. You've also been recognized. I think the World Bank funded the Chennai Cities Partnership as a unique model of development, and it will be implemented in three phases over a period of 7 years. Tell us about your wins, Mr. Cherubal.
First of all, yeah, thank you. And I think Smart City Mission, the question you asked earlier, I think one of the things is that we got a lot of opportunity to try out new things. And I've been in NGOs earlier related to urban projects, Janagraha and City Connect and so on. And I never seen this much opportunity for the city to try out different things, whether it's data related or whether it's concrete and steel. The idea is that just go ahead and do what other cities are doing, try out new things, don't be shy kind of a model. And with money, usually I think earlier it used to be simply advice and no money, or there'll be money but no planning. But here there's some starting point of putting some decent projects on the ground. So I think you brought up the point of city partnership. It's a big deal from what I can see. For the first time in this country, Chennai is going to be a city partner, which means World Bank will bring big amounts of money and state government will put in a lot of money. And that happened because of a lot of successes, not just Smart City, obviously. There are other departments, water department and others have done quite a bit of interesting work. So the idea was that typically now what we're doing is projects, even big projects in bits and pieces, whether it's a pedestrian plaza, whether it is water body restoration, bus buying, anything, all these are silo projects happening. The city partnership says, let's step back and ask ourselves, how do we scale? And to scale, you need certain institutions that doesn't exist so that scalability is possible. So for example, today, as everybody knows, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Or even if you talk about master plan, like Sanjeev pointed out, it's at a very high level. So master plan will blabber on about something, while the bus guy does whatever he can. It's a loss-making organization, though. Even if he has to buy 10,000 buses, the emphasis is always on some flyover, double the cost of the bus buying scheme, and so on. So there's pretty much no, even if you had a plan, there is no trickling down of that plan to the, I always say the city is like a cake. You've got to have multiple layers. You have the dog layer, stray dog layer, you have the tree layer, you have the stormwater drain layer. And unless you have a proper micro planning of those layers and then connect the dog layer with the tree layer, with the stormwater, with the bus, with the everything, if you don't have all those pieces in place, and this is what even a mediocre city usually has, our city doesn't have any of that. So the tree guy does whatever he wants, the bus guy does whatever he wants, not because they're evil or bad people, it's just that, that's their job. So city partnership means stepping back and saying, look, I like Transport for London in London, obviously, or LTA in Singapore, which says, look, there's a layer on top which does the planning, which says if the goal is to reduce the number of cars on the road and make more people walk and cycle and so on and so forth, you have to have a certain strategy. All institutions need to do certain things. Or if the plan is to become a Houston, where everybody, even to buy tomato and potato, you have to get into a car and drive around the town. That is also fine. That's also a model. I wouldn't agree, but let's say Houston or an Atlanta model, let's say. That also requires interdepartment planning and so on. So I think structural changes are what is important in the city partnership. More than the money and the project. Project obviously can be done, whether if you do one plaza, you can do 10 plaza. If you fix one water body, you can fix 100 water body. That's not a big deal. It is a big deal, but it's not as big a deal as setting those institutions in place. With respect to successes, I would say, I think the change in the way the system thinks more than any concrete and steel is what is important. So for example, plaza, everybody now talks about the plaza. Everybody's thrilled about the pedestrian plaza. But the 4 years ago, or even before, when we started planning it, people thought it was an idiotic project. And if you talk about, say, New York's, we used to keep saying New York, they've done this Times Square. They'll say that's Times Square, because you only see the finished product of Times Square and it looks beautiful. And the question was, you're not even able to do a simple footpath properly. Why are you trying to destroy our businesses? Why are you trying to destroy a neighborhood by shutting down cars and increasing the footpath and so on? So I think more than the concrete and steel, it is the panna mudiyadu. Basically, nahi chalega, or it can't be done in India. Can't be. If you say, look, Guwahati is done it, they'll say, no, Guwahati people are different. They are more cultured than us. If you say Bangalore did it, they'll say Bangalore is different because IT company and centric place, and so on. We always had an excuse for why something can't happen. But I think the change, not only from a World Bank point of view, but more from a department and the structural and even citizen point of view, right? The public today welcomes a lot of these ideas, because there's a demonstration effect. So I'll quickly rattle off a few. Parking management system, one of the most difficult projects I can think of. We are actually now collecting a lot of money, but more than money, it brings discipline to the road and the stick part of it. If the ultimate objective is to get towards buses and metro rail, that is the carrot. You need the stick, which is the congestion charge, the parking fees, the discouraging of cars so that people shift to buses. So those kinds of difficult pieces like the parking management right now is up and running. Glamorous projects like the cycle sharing, which is very difficult and failed in many places. Touchwood, it's fairly popular today in Chennai. It's painful to get these projects on the ground, because on paper it sounds beautiful, it sounds very easy. But the moment you say it's a PPP, the moment you say the cycles are going to be on the footpath, the moment you start getting into detail, you get all kinds of problems. And many of these are cutting edge projects. So, and the vendor themselves don't know, they come with good intention, and NGOs which promote such ideas also come with good intention. But the problem is the financial sustainability of it. They'll come and say, okay, 5 rupees an hour is good enough for us to survive. Then you realize that if you read between the lines, it says, no, they need to have ads on their station for them to survive. But then once you get into the ad, then you realize there are a lot of rules and regulations and high court orders which says yes or no to certain things. So my point is, smart city should be seen as children learning how to walk and run, and coming back to Sanyal's point, Mr. Sanyal's point, India, I've never seen this kind of a system anywhere in the world where I've traveled. I've traveled to certain third world countries or first world and so on. Nowhere have I seen such a centralized system like we have in India. Maybe Pakistan and Bangladesh has it, I don't know. But even Cambodia, Vietnam, anywhere you go, where you expect cities to be in that way because of their history, civil war, and so on. Cities are powerful. They are engines of growth. They have complete control over their destiny. So Hanoi is not the same as Saigon, I mean, Ho Chi Minh City, and so on and so forth. There's complete decentralization, and I don't mean this from an NGO intellectual point of view. I'm saying even if you forget all that, even if you forget the ideology part of it,
I think that
you
needs
don't
the
have capacity. Yeah, because see, capacity is not something that you can throw from World Bank or
Right.
Delhi or somewhere. It has to be built from the ground up, and capacity is built only when there's a demand. Engineers
Okay.
happen because there's a demand. So my point is, ultimately, smart city is more like a laboratory. But no matter how much laboratory you do, ultimately there has to be drastic decentralization. Whether you call it smart city or green city, it has to be drastic decentralization so that in the next many years, cities start actually building their capacity with or without World Bank, with or without central government fund, etc.
Okay. All right. I want to go to Dr. Sandeep Mahatme for Agartala Smart City was among the 3 cities awarded Award of Excellence for innovations undertaken in urban transport during COVID-19. Dr. Sandeep,
Yeah, good afternoon.
can you put on your camera, please? I just wanted you to share with us this the innovations undertaken in urban transport for which you all were recognized.
Okay, so before coming to the smart city, let me give a different perspective from the Tripura side. That many people they don't know that where's the location of Agartala, but and then the other issues that many don't know that Agartala was a planned city earlier. That the Maharaja of Tripura he has built this city, and he was the only Maharaja who had built his own airport. So the kind of vision he had about the infrastructure and the urban planning was tremendous, and the roads, the drains, and other things. So then subsequently after that, the government has forgot about the planning and the urban development almost for 30 years. And whatever problems were created because of the urbanization, like flooding and the traffic congestion and other issues, subsequently in last 3 years a lot of work has been done in the smart city. So as Sanjay sir has mentioned that again we need not to plan. So in the smart city we started immediately implementing managing the problems, and many of the drains were constructed. Then the integrated command control systems were brought in the smart city, and these smart components they are monitoring the flooding as well as immediate evacuation of flood waters. So this is in brief about managing some of the components from the smart city. But the urban transportation, we have received prizes, and the integrated command control system has been made functional. The cameras, they are monitoring the traffic violations, as well as the ANPR, the plate monitoring is being done by the police department. Traffic, they are monitoring it properly. The integrated command and control system is one place where all the stakeholders they are sitting together. The fire department, traffic, the urban local body representatives, and from that center they are controlling the entire traffic management system.
Okay. So I want to extend this to Dr. Jagtap now. He's been CEO of the Pune Smart City earlier, and now he heads the Pune Mahanagar Parivahan Mahamandal. So, Dr. Jagtap, can you tell us about the e-buses that you all have introduced, and how is that scheme really successful? Dr. Jagtap?
Hello.
Yes. don't know. He is probably we're not able to get his link. So let me move on to Shrikant. I think, waste management, I think was a topic that I brought up with Mr. Sanyal, and somehow that was being neglected. And he did say that, yes, the management itself is the major issue. But, the number of projects, if you go to see in the overall analysis amongst all, they seem to be fewer, because I think the optics are not so great for those who administer these projects, or is there any other reason?
I think actually we are seeing greater emphasis on both the solid and liquid waste management, particularly with the current union budget and the 15th Finance Commission grants. Totally, we are expecting to see about 5 lakh crores of outlays over the next 5 to 7 years across solid and liquid waste management. And that's a very substantive sum of money, unprecedented in the history of independent India, that any one sector has received so much emphasis, including water supply. The 5 lakh crores that I'm mentioning includes water supply as well. So therefore, if you take out waste management, it'll be a little less than half. So 2 lakh crores plus. But even in the earlier term, between Swachh Bharat Mission and Amrit, there was a fair bit of outlays on this, and the execution pace of Amrit was slightly better than the Smart Cities Mission. And therefore, I think, and with Swachh Bharat, solid waste management also was given emphasis. So I think we will definitely see, I'm very hopeful of seeing, if you take a 10-year period from say 2014 to 2025, I'm fairly hopeful about the waste management space as one of the areas where between water supply, solid and liquid waste management, I believe we will see substantive difference. And I'm also seeing very interesting partnerships getting forged besides at the union government level, but particularly at the state government level between academia, civil society and governments to actually transform waste management at scale. Clearly, some of the larger cities like Bangalore are still struggling. But there are states like Odisha, for example, that are doing well, and there are other states as well, not so urbanized states even, which are doing well in waste management.
Right. Dr. Sonavne, I think with the kind of outlay Shrikant just mentioned, how do you foresee in Maharashtra the water is key area of difficulty for lots of people? How do you foresee this kind of allocation? I have not seen the Maharashtra budget in terms of allocation for water, but considering the overall goal in the country is a lot to boost the water supply with the Jal Jeevan Mission and all, how do you see this particular vertical being addressed?
Good afternoon, Sanjeev ji. Good afternoon, Pratap. And good afternoon, everyone. Should I restrict myself only to water sector, or should I also share my experience in the field of urban management for almost last 30 years?
We'll come back to that. Right now, if you can address the water question.
As far as you see, water sector is concerned, in terms of Maharashtra has 163 cube of water available, out of which Maharashtra is allocated only 125 cube, and rest of it has to be given to the neighboring states. In water sector, you see, total out of total water available, the first priority is given to domestic water supply, and 15% of total water available is allocated to domestic use, both urban and rural. 80% goes to agriculture and 5% goes to industries. This is the allocation. Out of that 15%, you see, most of the water is used in urban areas. There are more than 26 municipal corporations and more than 350 municipal councils, smaller towns. So 26 larger urban areas and 350 smaller urban areas. Basically, when we consider region wise or basin wise, we realize that 4 basins do not have water scarcity problem. Only one basin has some water scarcity problem, and the 4 basins do not have any water scarcity problem. Most of our cities have adequate allocation. They have adequate water quota reserved for the urban areas, which can fulfill the needs. Depending upon the criteria, you see 70 LPCD, where there is no sewerage system, and 135 to 130 LPCD, where there is a sewerage system. In Maharashtra, most of the cities have almost good network for water distribution, at least treatment of water and distribution of water. But most of the cities, including city like Mumbai, do not have 100% coverage for water network and do not have 100% coverage for sewerage network. Sewerage is neglected thing. What treatment of wastewater and discharge of that treated water in water body is a neglected sector. And even when I studied not only Maharashtra, almost all 100 smart cities, water problem of all 100 smart cities in India, I realized that 94 cities have adequate water resources available. The problem lies with the treatment facility. They have inadequate treatment facility and inadequate distribution network. Only 6 cities have some water scarcity problem. I'll again restrict to myself only to Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, some cities, for city like Latur, had to be supplied water by railway when in drought year.
Yes.
So it has happened. But does that mean that Latur city doesn't have adequate water reserved, adequate water available? Answer is, in that particular year, due to drought, they could not get adequate water. Otherwise, almost for all urban local bodies and even for rural local bodies, we have adequate quantity of water available. The problem lies again with management. Management of water resource. We have really not understood the importance. Water is a precious commodity, and as Sanjeev ji has rightly said, it is either misutilized or underutilized. So, government of Maharashtra has taken several efforts. There is a separate department called Water Supply and Sanitation Department that takes care of implementation of missions like Amrut. Urban Development Department, Government of Maharashtra also takes care of implementation of that Amrut mission. And I believe now with the implementation of Amrut mission, Maharashtra will be able to ensure that in all urban areas, in all cities, 100% distribution network is made available and equitable distribution of water to all, even to slums. That is being done. In some cities, we are implementing 24/7 water supply schemes, but the priority as on today is ensuring that all cities get adequate water. Raw water made all cities, raw water is made available to all cities, number one. Second, number two, the cities have adequate capacity of treatment of water, and they relay their network to ensure that water distribution is done equitably. And even the slum dwellers also get the water as per the norms prescribed by the government.
All right. Let me see if Dr. Jagtap, we can hear him. Dr. Jagtap?
I hope I'm audible now.
Yeah, better. So I wanted to know now energy efficiency again is another area, and you all are doing this e-buses scheme. So just tell us about what has been the success so far.
Yeah, thank you, Pratap ji. Basically, when we are talking about municipal transportation, we are seeing that there's a drastic change that has happened in the last decade. We have moved from diesel transportation towards CNG, and the new in thing that we come across all across the world is the E on a larger scale. We see that there has been an overall scheme that has been developed by the DHI Government of India, wherein under the FAME subsidy, FAME 1 and for the PM's employer. We missed out on the first FAME 1 subsidy, but we had the smart city to rely upon and bank upon, where we got our first 150 electric buses from the smart city side, and when these buses we got this in the month of February 2019, and in the last 2 years we have been seeing that we had a very good support and acceptance at the city level. Overall, the working and the functioning of bus has been very efficient. It is an energy efficient system, very environment friendly, and all these buses that we had got were electric buses that were taken on gross cost contract.
Charging
The average-
infrastructure. What about the charging infrastructure?
These buses, when they came, we had got it through BYD Electra, wherein those the company that got it from the GCC. We provided 2 depots which had come up with their own charging infra. So with a charging of 4 hours, these buses run for an average of about 160 to 200 kilometers per day. And with an intermittent charging for 1 hour, you can increase their limit by another 50 to 60 kilometers. So averagely, these buses are running, say, between 200 to 250 kilometers per day, even on our long distance routes. And all these buses are compliant to our BRT system in the city of Pune. And they are
Total number of buses now? How many are the total buses, e-buses?
total buses that we have today are 150 that are functional for the last 2 years. In fact, under FAME 2, we have already given order for additional 150 buses and 350 in addition to that, which we are getting it from the corporation side. So with our present fleet of 150, in the coming year, we'll be adding 500 more electric buses. So with total fleet size of 650, by December 2021, Pune will be having the biggest fleet of electric buses in India to run in the public sector in any city.
Okay. Moving on to Mr. Kirupa Shankar, I think from a developer kind of a perspective, I want to know, obviously we've heard all the other cities talk about various projects they've undertaken. I want you to throw some light on the public-private partnerships kind of projects that you might have, sort of worked on with certain cities. So maybe a couple of examples.
See, L&T on public-private partnership is primarily into major infrastructure like roads, bridges, transportation, and complete airports and so on. Right now, we have 15 operational road assets, and we have 1 transmission line network. Coming to smart cities, we are still evaluating on the public-private partnership, and BharatNet also, we are still evaluating on the public-private partnership. Of course, right now we have completed almost 23 smart cities, 23 command control centers in the normal EPC route through the smart city mission. And of course, in the last 1 year through COVID scenario, it was used as a COVID war room by the district administration and the police, which was a tremendous success.
So can you cite some of the advantages that technology has brought about in certain smart cities?
See, what has happened, especially in the last 1 year, phenomenal interest has been developed by the civic administration as well as the police into this smart city. See, the command control center became a war room for the collector, the city commissioner, as per also the superintendent of police and the health department. One is obviously the video surveillance camera was used to avoid overcrowding during lockdown. The public announcements were made. And in Raipur, there was a very good use case where we did a 3-kilometer virtual radius across the city, where it was brought under some COVID limit. So we were able to monitor the vehicles which are crossing this virtual lines, and we were able to challan them. So it was like a deterrent for the vehicles to move into that, or move out of that specific area. And variable message systems, which in any smart city, it was used quickly to pass on the COVID awareness messages. Then the helpline numbers, in fact, the command control center was made into it helped us scenario, even for a very senior citizens, a doctor call system, even in many cases, a nurse call system. It was the COVID war room. it was, I mean, the command control center was used. What I'm trying to say is the whole thing, I would say, induced a lot of interest in the complete civil administration, understanding the importance of this project, right from transportation, police, and top to bottom of the administration layer. So it was overnight, it was converted to Corona call centers, I would say. So in quite a few cases, we also use this opportunity to make certain applications. Of course, the simplest of all of that was the mask detection, which is a simple thing to do. But at the same time, we also did the crowd analytics in more than 500 plus cameras in few individual small tier 2 cities. And then the AI-based, artificial intelligence-based monitoring, vehicle monitoring systems through camera install. I mean, you install the camera into the mobile vehicles and monitor various zones for implementation of COVID lockdown. Then in case of Wi-Fi, even the Wi-Fi login page was used to say what are the do's and don'ts in COVID stage. And in case of, there was one application where we developed to monitor the people's real-time movement, practically using their mobile once they download this mobile app, where all they are going, right? So based on that, they will be tagged as red, yellow, green during with the movement status. This is again during the COVID time we could do. In Tamil Nadu, we did, I mean, almost 190 critical government applications we were running during the COVID time. These are some of the few cases which we are able to do. I mean,
Okay.
lot of research. Yeah.
Right. I want to go to Mr. Cherubal on. So I want to actually to go through some of the panelists in terms of if they can tell us what opportunities may be there for the private sector from cities. So Mr. Cherubal, can you cite some of the forthcoming opportunities for the private sector in terms of taking up projects in the cities that in your city?
I think massive. Again, I can only from what I can see right now, it's massive. For example, we are going to multiply Plaza into something 110 kilometers of mega street. Basically, it's taking plazas and urban forest to rest of the city in 6 different areas and so on. So obviously, it's a massive construction work. I don't mean to sound like a simple, it's a complicated construction work, because it's not just a footpath job. It's going to be integration of a lot of different things, whether it's utilities, parking management, cameras, IoT devices, so that all the learnings of the last many years from not just Chennai, but other cities like others have pointed out, has to be in these places. No more, I mean, the attitude we are taking is no more excuse that, okay, we didn't plan, or we didn't add this, or we didn't add that.
What would be the cost of this project?
See, $100 million is something, the initial estimates, and obviously it'll be a lot more than that, because these are just the basic things we're talking about. Then obviously the bus, it's not my area, but at least I can see that there's a lot of emphasis on bus and transportation. So obviously that will be there. There's equally big amount of investment in the water sector, because the Metro Water has done a pretty decent job, and we are supposedly one of the first people to do sewage recycling for industries and so on. And water-starved city like Chennai, it's a big deal that we recycle every drop. But also something very interesting is that at least first time I'm seeing that there's a lot of discussion and beyond discussion in terms of analytics, artificial intelligence, drones, what to do with data. These are just like the Wild West, as they say in the US. I mean, it's just we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. Anything and everything seems possible. So that those kinds of from startup to matured companies coming in, helping us do all these kinds of things is going to be a major opportunity. Because like I always say, we don't have 50, 60, 100 years to sit back and relax like Hong Kong could or Singapore could. We need to do all this in a very fast way. So with limited resource, for us to translate into action, we'll need a lot of analytics and data related work.
And all this is coming up now in the next few months?
Yeah, few months, I mean, let's say a couple of years.
Okay, all right. Let me move to Dr. Sonavne. In water, Dr. Sonavne, are there opportunities for the private sector? You say that there is so much of work required within Maharashtra as well. As if the budget has been allocated for this sector in a bigger way, do you see opportunities for the private sector?
yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for private sector in water and wastewater management sectors. Take example of Nagpur city, wherein 24/7 water supply scheme is being implemented through a private player. Even the wastewater is also treated and given to Mahajanko. That plant was also erected with the support of private sector. Similarly, in other cities also, it is being replicated, and some of the cities are adopting that Nagpur model to ensure that 24/7 water supply schemes are implemented. Even in case of treatment of wastewater, recycle and reuse of wastewater, the same Nagpur model is being replicated in some other cities. And third sector is waste management, solid waste management. In that sector also, there are a number of opportunities available to private players.
I think the city is also earning on the basis of the treated wastewater which is being supplied to the power plants, isn't it?
Yeah, Nagpur earns a revenue of nearly 18 crores per year. Now it will be almost around 40 crores per year, because initially they started 30 ml. Now Nagpur city has also agreement with Mauda power plant for supply of 200 water. So they will be getting additional revenue, and there is a mandate issued by central government, energy Ministry of Energy, that if the power plant is within the radius of 50 kilometers, then they are mandated to use the treated water from urban local bodies. They have to enter into an agreement with urban local bodies and use water for cooling purpose, only treated water for cooling purpose. That mandate was issued almost 3 years ago. And in Maharashtra, city like Nashik, city like Bhusawal, there the power city like Nagpur, where the power plants are within the radius of 50 kilometers, they will be benefited for creating infrastructure for treatment of wastewater, and that wastewater will be reused. Government of Maharashtra has also issued a mandate to all urban local bodies to treat 100% wastewater and at least reuse 30% of that recycled water within the city.
Okay. Dr. Sandeep Mahatme, can we have you also tell us what opportunities for the private sector are coming up?
Yes, I would like to say that there are a lot of opportunities for private sector in Tripura. The Urban Development Department is headed by Honorable Chief Minister Sri Biplab Kumar Deb, and under his visionary leadership, he is ensuring that investment flows in the urban sector. So he has requested, and we have also received 200 crore rupees of special grant from the 15th Finance Commission. So that is specially for the development of 7 district headquarters, the urban local bodies which are located in the 7 district headquarters. And apart from that, we have also received around 1,800 crore rupees ADB loan from the Ministry of Finance. So that is already in the final stages. That is for the strengthening of the 20 local urban local bodies, the infrastructure like roads, sewerage, as well as the stormwater drainage, street lights, the solid waste management. Again, in the Swachh Bharat Mission too, a lot of money is going to flow in the state of Tripura for 20 urban local bodies. Similarly, urban mobility also, buses and the rapid transit system, we are also going to submit some proposals. And also in the Jal Jeevan Mission, also a lot of opportunities are there for the private sector. If we get good participants, then it will be very useful for developing quality as well as sustainable infrastructure in the small state. So the pace of execution has also improved. The capacity building has also improved in the last 3 years. And with the smart city support, a lot of things have improved in the capital city of Agartala. So we are expecting that in next 3 to 5 years, a lot of things are going to move in the state of Tripura. And this is in addition to the infrastructure development of highways as well as railways. So urban sector, a lot of investment we are planning, and we are hoping for a lot of changes in the urban sector.
Okay, and Dr. Jagtap, can you also tell us what opportunities are there for the private sector?
What we see, especially in the urban sector in Pune, we are seeing a lot of mobility and movement towards private sector as of now. When we be specific to transportation, in the transportation sector, it is a gross cost contract under which the vehicles are being brought by the private player, run by him, fueled by him, maintained by him, and it is per kilometer basis that we are paying for him. So all our e-buses that we have procured in the last few years, as well as the CNG buses, have been procured by the way of gross cost contract. Besides that, we have been able to implement few of our ITMS projects, wherein we have provided AVLS or the e-ticketing. All these have gone together with the private players, where on usage-based charges have been paid. So be it per ticket basis or per bus basis, this money is being given out to them. Besides that, there are other opportunities that are forthcoming, like we are moving towards the e-bus sector, where electric buses will be requiring a lot of energy. We have a lot of depots which amount to almost 70 acres of land. So the potential to develop almost 20 megawatts that we have is something that we have and for the same have already come out. Besides that, in the near future, since we are sitting on most of these depot lands, a commercialization of these depot lands by way of public-private partnership on BOT basis is something that is already getting prepared, and we see that a lot of different opportunities that come in the municipal transport company that presently we are running here in Pune by way of these various activities that are scheduled in the coming 1 or 2 years. Thank you.
All right. Shrikant, we can see that there are good case studies like Dr. Sunavne mentioned about Nagpur, and why can't we just replicate in other cities those case studies which are already working well for some cities? Why does everybody have to reinvent the wheel?
Excellent. Great question. Does not have easy answers. I like to say that our cities or urban India is the graveyard of pilots. Over the last 20 years, we've done dozens of successful pilots, which have remained pilots. So there is a, like they say in nutrition, that kids remain dwarves. They don't grow up to be healthy individuals if you don't have adequate nutrition. These pilots remain dwarves. I think one of the reasons is what you had alluded to earlier, which is frequent transfer of officials. I'd kind of, in an overarching way, I would call it lack of institutional memory. The fact that we are not building institutions which have memory, and that I think is very important, particularly in the public realm, where many of these projects, to take them from pilot to scale, is actually a long process. It's a political process, and even administratively it will take time, just in physical construction and conceiving the project, etc., financing it and so on. And I think the fact that there is a revolving door of senior officers who come and go from the municipality, not just at the commissioner level, but also one level below that. Do remember that most of our cities, if not all, are grossly dependent on state government staff. And therefore, you end up not building strong institutions. So that's the revolving door for municipal officials is certainly a problem. Because do remember that originally, and this is a bit of an irony, originally the bureaucracy was meant to serve as the continuum, with the political leadership getting changed every 5 years. But now you see that within a 5-year political span, you probably see 3 or 4 commissioners, like you mentioned about the smaller cities and towns having an average tenure of less than 12 months. So one is institutional memory, and the second, I also think, is there is some active facilitation and curation that is required to convert what is a best practice in a particular place, in a particular time, to a practice in some other place at some other point in time. That requires facilitation and curation, which is not just technical. It's also a lot of communication, making the project saleable. What earlier one of you had spoken about exceptionalism, right? The fact that I think Raj was referring to it. What we generally call Indian exceptionalism, saying that we are different. Bangalore is different, but I'm different. So for everything, that exceptionalism can only be addressed through contextualization, which means in their particular context, in that particular point in time, this particular pilot has to seem attractive. That requires a lot of curation and facilitation. But I think it's a crying need. I think India cannot afford to keep reinventing the wheel. We simply cannot afford it in terms of human development and also in terms of finances. We don't have that much development capital to keep, throwing money at these pilots and, serving as some vanity projects of officers within their short service tenures. So we have to I think we need a marketplace for both ideas and for conversion of those ideas into practice through this active curation and facilitation. And in that process, we can't just involve government officials, but we should remember that contractors and consultants have become a very important part of this, because to build capacities of the Indian state is non-trivial. It's going to take a long period of time. Until then, we have to treat this as a partnership, including with contractors and consultants, and co-opt them into the process as well, where required, build their capacities, particularly of small-time contractors, etc. But that marketplace today is non-existent. So there is market making that is required. What tends to happen, Pratap, very often is we document the case studies into fat, ugly, unreadable books, which get inaugurated in webinars, right, with senior ministers or secretaries or whoever. But who has the time to read them? The bureaucrats and folks like Raj who work within the government will attest to the fact that firefighting occupies most of your day, or dealing with day-to-day transactions. So you need you need a group of people that is able to take it to them and in a very easily consumable way, so they can give decisions on the replicability of it.
In fact, taking this point a little further, taking those case studies, converting them into model contracts, templatized, and then
Absolutely.
what really is left is to contextualize.
Absolutely.
So if that much, if we are ready, things can be fine. So I want to go to Mr. Krupashankar. How is his experience in dealing with these model contracts? I mean, is it something that you need to re-engineer right from the start with all the possible, or there are set, sort of templates?
Yeah, I would say I only wish my customer knows what exactly they want. That's the biggest challenge when I take a contract. So of course, in the last 2 years, there has been quite a few improvements, I would say, because we started this smart world communication business around 4.5 years back. I would say in the last 2 to 2.5 years, yes, there's a lot of clarity being built in, but still a long way to go, because in certain cities you find the police is the end customer, in certain cities the civil administration, in certain cities it's different. But whereas the contract comes from somebody else, right, and the approving authority is somebody else, and the end user is somebody else. Unfortunately, there is no overall requirement, which, I mean, they don't come together and say, yes, this is what we need. So that practically delays each and every project, right? One is the delay, but even then, if you are able to ultimately deliver, ultimately we are here to deliver what the end customer and ultimately the citizens want, right? We would be extremely keen to do that, but bringing clarity is the biggest challenge. I hope in the months and years to come, it improves a lot.
Dr. Sunamne, you heard Mr. Krupashankar and Shrikant about the challenges. So we have good case studies. People don't know, officials don't know what exactly they need to deliver, and somehow there is exceptionalism kind of a situation, as Mr. Chirubal also pointed out. So given your experience in urban management, where this is a blend of where actually people in the places know what should be done, but somehow they are caught in the web of legacies and the structures. So either they have short tenures, so they can't really see it through, or they do not follow it is not seen cool to be copy pasting something which is a successful case study.
Honestly speaking, you see the frequent transfers of the executive heads of any organization, any department, that is no doubt a problem. But I disagree with this view that the frequent transfers is the only reason for the mismanagement in urban areas. More than the frequent transfers of the officers, what we have failed is, you see, planning, proper planning. So Benjamin Franklin has rightly said, when you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. So that has happened. We have not created systems. It has been very wisely said that let the people think and the systems work. So what is required is a mandate to set the system wherein whether X is working or Y is working, it should be immaterial. Whether the person gets a tenure of 3 years or 1 year, that should also be immaterial. There should be systems, and the successor should follow those systems, improve upon those systems. That is lacking. You see, I always believe that in the field of urban management, if at all something has gone wrong in the past, the only thing is we have misutilized and underutilized our resources. We have not planned properly. We only concentrated on land use planning. We have never planned for the investment that is required. And then our planning has gone wrong because we have never implemented what we have planned. On the field, implementation was always different than what was planned. So what we need to do now, right now, is to rethink in terms of urban planning, and then plan cities. The new concept which is recently introduced, that 15-minute city. So that can be done. That 15-minute concept, 15-minute city concept has to be incorporated now. There has to be a mandate from the central government to the states and to the urban local bodies that we need to revisit our planning process. We need to revisit our implementation process, do away with the flaws, do away with the mistakes that we have committed in the past, and then start rebuilding the cities based again on the 3 principles which we have adopted in smart city, either greenfield development, redevelopment, or retrofitting. For existing cities, redevelopment and retrofitting, these are only 2 options. And for new cities, new satellite towns, greenfield development, that is the only option. So whatever we have envisaged under smart city mission should not be limited as a pilot project in that particular one city. There has to be holistic and integrated planning for the entire city. We have already failed in implementation, so we need to find those areas where we need to improve. And you see, infrastructure planning is not only construction of roads, is not only providing water supply systems. We have to plan for both physical and social infrastructure, and we have to provide adequate financial resources. We have to provide trained manpower which is capable of implementing what is planned. Otherwise, planning will remain on papers for decades together, and we will only blame the systems. We should not blame the systems. We have to be, if at all we have to blame someone, we have to blame the people in the system, those who fail to.
Right.
Sorry, I must have, I think, exceeded my limits.
No problem.
This is what I personally feel.
Dr. Madme, Dr. Sandeep Madme, you have the ability of being a little bit more agile in Tripura Development Authority and the Agartala Smart City. You don't have as many probably legacy issues as larger cities have. What do you feel? How can you, without having the handicap of larger cities, be more agile in terms of delivering smarter cities more quicker? Dr. Sandeep? Okay, I don't see that he is there. Dr. Jagtap, same question for you. I mean, you've had the experience of being in Pune Smart City, and what do you feel are the areas in urban management that we need to, if you can just quickly tell us a few points, 2, 3 points.
Pratapji, basically, when we are talking for the city of Pune, we are a big enough city when we talk about the volume, the population, the size, dimensions, as well as historically. and there are some set practices, some set norms that have been followed over a period of time. Say we have the Bombay Municipal Act, under which the city has been functioning for long. And while doing so, we see as we grew as a local self-government body, it was only the Panchayat that around 50-20 years back, we got a recognition for all local bodies from the central government. And with that incept and that thing coming into picture, the support that came up into NURM was something right from the center and the state government, which helped the cities to grow and look into different areas and different avenues of growth, as well as concentrate on infrastructure, both physical as well as social infrastructure that was rightly put up by Mr. Sonowane. Now, when we're talking about the whole concept, the smart city has brought in something quite new to the whole thing, that is the citizen engagement. What used to happen is the city as a whole, it was the city administrators, the officials, as well as the elected representatives who used to plan out what is to be done with the infrastructure, the budget, as per their whims and fancies and whatever they perceived was best for the city. But herein, what happened is the first time across, the smart cities provided with an opportunity where we could see that the citizen engagement was one concept that was picked up and was tried to integrate into a much larger, different context, which helped to utilize these funds in a much more distributed way as per the needs and requirements of citizens. That was one different change that we could see. However, what the other thing that I could like to comment here in short is, come what may, there are some set practices that have been stood the test of time. There are systems which have been functioning for long, which help us to move around and work in that direction. But like it is rightly said, our day-to-day urban situation with the kind of infrastructure that we have, the increase in population, the workload, if we are engrossed into our, probably we get very less time to look into other areas and aspects of growth and to think into different kinds of new areas. I think if a city administrator is sure that he has ample time in his hand, he should look into different areas, different cities. Things can be replicated, brought into use with some adaptations as per the need and requirements of the city. The city should be seen as a living city where it should be just land urban planning for infrastructure, but for the citizens at large. Thank you.
Right. So that brings us to the end of the program. We've run out of time. So just to conclude, I think one, as Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal said, we need to do an outcome report on what have we learned in terms of the whole smart cities mission so far, and probably table that so that we know that this is what we should do and this is what we should not do. I think more important, we don't end up wasting resources. I think the other thing that we are saying is that can we actually create a full data bank of projects which work well, which cities have been successful with? Can we templatize the contracts and the way a public-private partnership? Because I think major challenges in capacity building are in that area where conceptualization of projects which are up for a PPP are most difficult to really prepare. And then, so we have a wealth of wisdom amongst all of us. I mean, I was talking to the others in our Infra Nirbhar series, and for just to give you an example, the Samruddhi Mahamarg, which is between Mumbai and Nagpur, is going to come up with 19 townships. I mean, then we have got, our Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor. We've got the East-West corridor.
24. Let me correct, 24.
Okay, right. So the opportunity to correct our mistakes of the past is right in front of us. And I think, but we need to capture this database and feel no shame in actually copying the successes of others within the country and applying them within the country itself for ensured success. So with that, thank you panelists. Thank you very much for your participation. Dr. Sonowane, Dr. Sandeep Mahatme, Mr. Kripa Shankar, Mr. Cherubal, and Mr. Srikanth. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, Dr. Jagtap, and we'll see you soon. All the best.